What are we going to need to know in order to approach reading Lacan's Écrits, his writings? First, we are going to need to know about a concept of what is often referred to as the Borromean knot. Lacan's Borromean knot is composed of three elements of a topology. The knot implies the fundamental interconnectedness of three terms, where if one term is removed, the entire structure dissolves. These three terms appear throughout the Écrits: the imaginary, the symbolic, and the real, or the ISR. The ISR is a psychic topology, a symbolic representation that aims to communicate the structure of Lacan's thought about the psyche on the level of the conscious, preconscious, and unconscious mind. This is one of the many reasons that Lacan is referred to as a structuralist. However, it is also important to note that it is more correct to refer to the Borromean knot as the Borromean chain, in that the sense that this structural topology represents an interconnection of different but mutually interdependent threads, and not just one thread twisted in upon itself. Moreover, Lacan emphasizes that the ISR chain is to be conceived of as non-hierarchical. In other words, the real ultimately does not take primacy over, or could be understood independent of, the imaginary and the symbolic. Rather, the real is something we understand through and in relation to the imaginary and the symbolic. The same is true for all three terms. Since the Borromean chain is composed of three elements, we should first break down what these three elements represent. The first is the imaginary, which is a register which refers to me, or moi, the ego, as a construction of an identity dependent on an ideal image, an image of omnipotence that reflects an inverse relation that the subject has with its own starting condition as an infant, an impotent body. The ideal image as ego construction site is what Lacan calls the mirror stage, where the subject becomes captured by a specular identity that alienates the subject in a narcissistic mirage of a perfect body. This perfect body represents, to the subject, an illusion of wholeness, synthesis, autonomy, and similarity. Next, we can isolate the symbolic register, which is broadly speaking the domain of language and society, or simply intersubjectivity. Here, language represents a key superstructure. Superstructure means that Lacan understands language as being an autonomous order, independent of its relation to the biological body and physical world. Language precedes the birth of every individual body, continues after we are gone, and conditions the way in which we understand the world while alive. As it relates to our body and the world, Lacan understands the symbolic as responsible for castration, which does not refer to a literal biological castration, but the way that assuming an intersubjective sexual identity requires renunciation of a total enjoyment or satisfaction or jouissance, that I cannot have it all. There is a logical motion here that resembles the negation of negation, where the renunciation or prohibition of total enjoyment opens the condition of possibility for partial enjoyment, of jouissance or satisfaction. Here is where we can place Lacan's notion of barred subjectivity in relationship to symbolic differences, otherness, absence, and lack. Finally, the register of the real. The register of the real is the register of the subject's reality, not the ego. In contrast to the ego, which is structured by the ideal image, the subject is structured by the unknown thing, sometimes referred to as das Ding, or the thing. The unknown thing is not something impersonal, a dimension independent of the human being, like Kant's noumena, but rather the unimaginable and unsymbolizable X, alien to both the imaginary and the symbolic, that is the most intimate part of the subject's reality. It is experienced as both unforgettable for the subject, a residue of primal castration, and at the same time it is forbidden, unacceptable to affirm for an intersubjective identity, opening us to an incredible paradox and contradiction at the heart of our being, where we must tarry with the negativity of the unknown thing at our core. This brings us to the total structure of Lacan's topology, of the Borromean ISR chain. If these three elements require each other to hold together, what holds them together? Lacan started to theorize not about the object of desire, of the unknown, unforgettable, forbidden thing, but the cause of desire, which he situated on the level of a strange lacking entity which he referred to as object petit a, the object cause of desire. The object cause of desire has no positive content, has no substantial consistency in itself, but rather functions as a placeholder for the cause of motion, or what Lacan will start to call the drive, which repetitively circles the object petit a. It is this dimension that holds together the me of the imaginary, the intersubjectivity of the symbolic, and the unknown thing of the real. Now we can think of the Borromean ISR chain as a total structure, articulating the relations between me, intersubjectivity, and the unknown thing. First, the imaginary to symbolic. Here we see the renunciation or prohibition or even sacrifice of total enjoyment. First encountered in the specular capture of the ego ideal of the perfect body, and as a compensation for this renunciation, the attainment of a part enjoyment via participation in the collective social body, via the assumption of an intersubjective sexual identity. Next, in the symbolic to the real, we see the part enjoyment in collective social participation move towards an impossible to communicate higher order mystery in relation to an intimate unknown thing, das Ding, or the thing, an unforgettable and at the same time forbidden reality that leaves us tarrying with paradox and contradiction. Finally, the real to the imaginary, we see the higher order mystery of our being related to the cause of our desire, and the secret to the motion of the drive, a motion as repetition that will come to acquire a weird type of eternal quality, not in the sense of the eternal return of the same, but something which repeats the primal scene of the real. Altogether, the Borromean ISR chain is an essential structure of Lacan's thought, and absolutely central to understanding Lacan's writings. So again, we have a knotted topology between three different elements. If one ring is severed, either me, intersubjectivity, or the unknown thing, the entire structure falls apart. We have a psychic topology, as a symbolic representation of the imaginary symbolic real, which is meant to communicate a non-metaphorical structure of the unconscious, preconscious, and unconscious mind. Here we should think ultimately of this structure as a chain rather than a knot, a chain of three interconnected threads which are mutually interdependent and not just a single thread. Finally, this ISR chain should be conceived as non-hierarchical, where the relations between the imaginary ego, symbolic intersubjectivity, and the real unknown are each key and important terms that ultimately find expression in the circular repetition of the drive, which orbits a lacking object, the primal scene, the object petit a. And with that structure in mind, we should be able to better understand what Lacan is thinking in his writings. Now, if you want a deeper guide when tackling the Écrits, Philosophy Portal has taught a full-length course on the entire text. You can find this full-length course at philosophyportal.online, where there are classes corresponding to every chapter of Lacan's writings. These courses give you access to the materials for life, and function as a great companion to any serious, deep reading. Philosophy Portal also has a curriculum, opening up to the foundations of modern philosophy, if you're interested in learning the foundations of Hegel's phenomenology and logic, Nietzsche's Zarathustra, or contemporary philosopher Alenka Zupančič's work on sexuality. You will find in-depth courses at philosophyportal.online. Philosophy Portal also offers philosophical guidance, one-on-one sessions, where our point is not to change your life, but rather to open a space for the philosophical interpretation of personal life, philosophy made personal. Philosophy Portal is also becoming an event space. If you become a member, we will be hosting 4 sessions a month throughout 2024. These events will be a great place to meet live guests and discuss with others interested in philosophy about the personal connection between one's own life and thinking. In January, we will be inviting meta-shaman Layman Pascal, philosopher Alenka Zupančič, and psychotherapist Elliot Rosenstock. These events will be recorded and available indefinitely for members in the future, but I hope to see you there live. For more, check out philosophyportal.online. And thanks for watching.